Good morning. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. When you get an opportunity to let us know you're here, drop into the chat box and say good morning. Hello, Jane, Kentucky. Hopefully you guys are enjoying a little bit better weather on this nice Valentine's morning. Happy Valentine's Day to you guys. See if we get a couple more people in the chat box and then we'll get started this morning. Good morning. Today we are going to be talking about equilateral triangles, and so that's what this is all about today. Hi, Barbara. I'm kind of excited about this one. There's a lot of different ways that you can tackle print design or quilt designs with equilateral triangles. So we'll talk a little bit about that today on the show. So I have left a little note at the top of the screen that I do have a quilt retreat coming up near Kalamazoo, Michigan on April 12th through the 15th. So if you're interested at all in that, please email me. My email address is there on your screen. So let us get started with talking about how we tackle equilateral triangles and some things that we need to know, or maybe you already know them, and this might be a good refresher for you. Let me drop down to the desk, my desk. This is the pattern, or the one that I chose to do. I've had this roll of fabrics for quite a while now, and I thought it was time to use them up. So in some ways this has gone a little wild, but on the other side of it, I think I'm going to love it. And so this is, these are all equilateral triangles. And we've seen the quilt, 1,000 pyramids, where you make rows of, the triangles, and you sew them in rows and stuff. This one I went with putting a larger equilateral triangle with four smaller equilateral triangles to create another big one so that it would go with this. So as we're looking at this and putting it together, we've got this row, and so the next one would start and work its way like this. I don't know how well you can see that. Let's go this way and put it right there in the kind of in the middle. The other thing that can happen is that you can put equilateral triangles together like this, or make diamond shapes. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. But for this one today, we're going to take and put it, and so the rows would be sewn simply straight across with the one row creating, and then underneath of it we're going to talk a little bit about how to close in those sides as well. But let's get to the part of sewing together. Let me get these out of the way. You're going to need a ruler, a 60-degree equilateral triangle ruler. I had gotten this one from Quilter Select, and I will say that from through the years, and before I received these rulers or was introduced to Quilter Select rulers, these really hold the rulers in place, because as you're going to see in a moment when we're cutting these triangles, the way that you go about cutting it, the ruler can move quite frequently. But the good thing about this ruler is it does not slide around. and I get a better cut out of that. So 60-degree equilateral triangle. Then they came out with this. So if you don't have, you know, this one, and you think about you'd like to have a 60-degree ruler, this one might be even a better choice, because it also has the triangle, the 60-degree, but it's also a diamond cutter, and you can cut your diamonds out of it, and you can see how that works too. And when you're cutting diamonds, you're cutting it by the lines that run through there. So I just wanted to share with you those two rulers. I'm going to put this one aside because I'm going to use this one. It just fits a little bit better on my table here. And so 60-degree equilateral triangle. And you can choose whatever size that you wanted to. I chose to make my large triangles 6 inches. And so I cut strips of fabric 6.5 inches wide. And then for the smaller ones, you're using half of that. And so my strips are 3.5 inches wide. And that's what this one is. And I have already cut from this one. And now, so that, you know, I cut the first 3.5 inch triangle, and now it's time for me to turn this around, and you're placing this and on there so that you have a 3.5 on the 3.5 inch line. It reaches the top. This is a 3.5 inch strip, and so you would and the nice thing, if you would notice these rulers, if you haven't seen it before, I can move this any which way that I need to for a better cut. So that would have been a very awkward cut for me at that point, and so now I can cut, move that ruler around, and my fabric isn't moving anywhere. And that is important, because if you are off at all with an equilateral triangle, once you get off, it's really hard to straighten things back out without taking it apart and re-sewing the materials. Okay? And the other thing that I want to say about this is that you're working with bias, and on both sides of the equilateral triangle, so we need to deal with and handle these very carefully. And if you can, I'm just going to take this one, you can see how much I can stretch that. And so if I'm pulling or moving that or stretching it, it's going to mess the whole thing up. So the other nice thing about this ruler is that you can take off the top edges, and this kind of keeps everything straight for me. You'll have the sharp points at one end, but you'll always have one flat point, and that flat point helps us keep our triangle in place. So now I have that triangle, and I am going to keep where my points, and decide which way that I want them to go. And I have chosen to put a solid color in each of my pieced 60-degree triangle. And so just move it around until you find an area that you rather like. Whoops, I'm out of the camera. A design or how you want to lay them down so that you like them, and it looks best to you. But this is just what I chose. I think this quilt would look very good in a monochromatic with, using maybe a light or a dark, and then the opposite with these three, and then a print, say you're going to go blues or pinks, oranges, yellows, whatever. It would make it wonderful. The other color scheme would be black and white. It would be, again, quite stunning with that if you have. But I had this roll of fabric. It was a line of fabric with a few other things thrown in, and so that is what I chose to use here. May not be your cup of tea, but I decided just to go wild. So for the rest of you who've just come in, happy Valentine's Day and welcome. We're talking about equilateral triangles. So let's put these and sew them together. I like to make sure that I have my flat points where they need to be. I start with this middle one and make sure that flat point is there, because what I have found sewing, this particular block together, it's easy to mess it up or turn it. But when you put this down, what is awesome about that flat point at the top is that you can bring it down, excuse me, with the camera, you can bring it down until it fits in there, and that little point is off the end, and it is the same on the other side. Okay? And hopefully you can see that, so that when I am sewing, the 1/4 inch should be right there, and the other 1/4 inch is going to come where those two meet on that side. Okay, so let's go to the machine and see what we have. All right. So I'm going to put that under, and I know that you probably cannot see this on the on your computer or phone or whatever you're watching on, but my needle is going to hit right where those two fabrics connect at that point. And after I sew it, I think you'll be able to see it. Now, the other thing that happens, and I just noticed it, and I will get to that in just a minute. My fabric moved on me. I did not put a pin in. And if you will look, let me go over to this one, then we don't have that glare. If you will look very carefully across that top, when I started out, my fabric moved a little bit on me, and so you can see that it's off on that point and it's here. One of the things that I found that has helped with that, pins work great, but if you don't put your pins in carefully, it can push the fabric, and when you pull it out, that sometimes can happen again as well. The other option that you have is using the acorn alignment glue and putting a dot of that on both ends of where you're going to sew. Make sure that you press the hot iron on it to dry it quickly, because if it's still wet, it's not going to serve your purpose real well. And so I am going to go ahead and sew and keep in mind that I have that mistake on there, so that I can work with that instead of taking something out and taking the time on camera. All right, so if you were going to drop a bit of glue to hold things in place, I would drop it right at the point up here, and the glue is not wanting to come out. I'm going to have to, sometimes I have to stick a pin in and get the glue moving again. Let's see if that worked. No, it's not sure. I usually, but you get the idea. There we go. We got a bit of glue there, and I'm going to put another little drop there. And now I want to line up those 2 points on this end and with that little spot. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this end. And I got the glue. And what's really nice about this glue, if you've not heard me talk about it before, is that it does not gum up the needle. If you should hit it, I try to make sure that, and then in the line of my seam. And so I'm going to dry that glue in there, and now hopefully I'm not going to have that issue with it moving. So let me go this way. And now maybe you can see this, is that my needle is going to hit right in where those two come together. All right. And let me all right. Now I'm pressing my seams away from that center one. I try to set my seams first, and then I run the side of my iron along it and then let it sit. If you start to move the iron and back and forth, those bias edges are going to move on you, and they are going to, get that little bow in there, and we want to try to avoid that as much as we can. And so now I'm going to take this one, and I can do the glue drop again, and it doesn't take much. It's just a tiny little drop, and then I can put and make sure that my points match on each end right there, so that nothing is left to chance, or use a pin. I sewed most of the ones that I have done without either a pin or the glue, but I will tell you that when I wasn't being as careful, I got off and had to go back and take a few out. So the glue is quick and easy. Pins are quick and easy. But when you put your pins in, you have to make sure that you haven't pushed your fabric because then it's not going to come out straight if you push your fabric. All right, so I have that completed, and then again I'm going to set my seam, press it to the side, and now I've got my 4 equilateral triangles now into a new equilateral triangle. And so this is going to be set together with this one. All right, and again, because of those flat edges, here we go, because of the flat edges, I can now make sure that this is even in there, as I did with all of these, and these points are going to be helpful as we sew the the blocks together. So I want to put this again I'm lining that up so that those two meet, and my arrows or my points at this side are meeting as well. Okay, oops, it's a little bit off. There we go. All right, and so I can put a bit of glue again, just since I started doing that. So let's get that in place, if I can pick that up. I feel very awkward sometimes when I can't do that. So I want to move that to where that is right where it needs to be. I'm going to hit it with the hot iron just to dry the glue, and then I'm going to go to this end and do the same thing right in that point, and make sure that these are matched up, and hit it with my iron. And again, I'm trying very hard not to stretch, not to move my fabrics in any way, so that make sure I have the right. Oh, I glued the wrong corner. So easy to do. So let me go back and put the right corner together. Easy to get turned around. All right, let's go to the machine. And again, if you are not starting right on the edge where those two pieces come together, you might need to do a little bit of an adjustment as you're coming into that. And you know, with your left hand, you are guiding your fabric. You're not pushing it or pulling it. When you're working with bias, that's really important to remember. It's probably the most important thing about working with the equilateral triangles. And so then you have your piece. So I'm going to set my fabric, set my seams, my thread seams, and then I am just going to let that sit. I am slightly lifting it up. I'm not pushing my iron along. If I was going to be dramatic, I would, you know, so you can see on camera, but I lifted a little bit ways off of that. And so now I have what I'm calling a set, and then I've been sewing that, as you saw before. I'll have a row of my one set, two sets, and this is a third set that I'm putting on there, and I'll keep sewing those together. Then I will keep doing that. But what I want to show you at this point is when I get to the edge of, you know, the quilt, this one would have, well, let me put this here. So you're going to have a side that's going to need something over here to handle these outside curves, because you would put another one like this. And this opening is going to need either another triangle, or you're going to be making half triangles as they go in there, whichever, and I don't have a single triangle, I don't think, at this moment to show you that. But depending on what you want to do at the side, on your ruler, you have your center point with your 1/4 inch seams, so that you can cut your strips and then, you know, cut that half, so you can either fill that in with another triangle. Let me see. This would be not a solid one, but it would be this over here. as you're, you're working along. And then you've got these, let me move this over. I just looked at the camera and you can't see. So, the last one over here would be one of these. And so actually for a second row, I sewed this one on the wrong side because I really want this to be over here. And then as you can see these points that keep coming out, you would be adding another triangle to it, or if you want to put a border through it, you would cut that half. There's another design element that I have found to be really nice, and it adds a different look to your quilt, and that is if you use it as border possibility on the side as you are putting your triangles. If you're cutting them in half to get a straight seam there, that these half equilateral triangles would be the same color as you're going to put a side border on it, and that gives a whole new design element to the sides of your quilt. So on these, as you're cutting through the center of your equilateral triangles out there, you're going to be using that as your cutting line, and making sure that when you're cutting it, you keep your 1/4 inch seams on the sides. All right, let me see if there's any questions. I see a lot of people choose to sew with the piece with more seams down against their feed dogs when they sew 2 pieces together. Why? I'd rather see the points I'm trying to hit. Because this is my theory on the why, and I think I've read it and I've heard it from other teachers as well. When you are sewing on your when it's going under the foot of your above the feed dogs. Let me get my head here for just a minute. Let me go over to here. When you're putting fabric under your machine and you're putting, if you have more seams under there, your feed dogs are the ones that are pulling it through. And it's also the same as, if you're, sewing a circle, you want the bulk of the fabric under that so the feed dogs are feeding it through, as opposed to, let me go back up and as opposed to the other way around, because the feed dogs would move that fabric. It moves them together a little bit easier. I hope that made sense. I'm doing a very poor job of explaining that. And I think it's a great question, because anytime you have multiple seams with a solid piece of fabric on the top, it's better to put it down to the feed dogs, because it takes it through the machine much easier, and you don't get that where when you get to the end of your seam line, that your fabrics are still together at the same, and it has not pulled that from the top to the bottom. So thank you for the question. Let me go back and see if there's any other questions for a minute. I don't see any with that. So there's biggest issues with equilateral triangles is to keep it straight. When you are putting the seams together and you're working with those 3, again, if you will remember to your center one, make sure the flat is on the top. Your next piece that you're putting on, that flat part is down here on either side, and it is at the bottom down here. And so that when you sew your solid piece onto the side, it's going to, when you turn it, you're going to have on one side of all of your pieces that flat part, and so that you're getting it evenly in there. The glue works really well. Pins work really well. If you are a sewer that, for a short seam, you do not need the pins, that's even better. Otherwise, no pulling, no stretching, and when you iron, put the iron down on your seams and don't, do that back and forth motion. And I think you will have a lot of success sewing with equilateral triangles. And again, the rulers that I would highly recommend that don't move the fabric and will get you more accurate cutting with that is the Quilter Select, either the equilateral triangle or the diamond ruler that has on one side where you can cut those triangles, or the full diamond in that. So if you're looking for getting a new ruler or needing one for that type of cutting, I highly recommend them because of the lack of movement in that. So let me just make sure that no one else. So have a wonderful Valentine's Day, and I will be back next week with I'm not sure exactly what I told Kristen I was going to do, so I'll be back next week and she will send out a message as to do that. So have a great day, have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.